Hello, I'm Barb. I work at the Red Pine Quilt Shop in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and I'm here today to show you how to make a kaleidoscope block, which is what we're going to be doing to make the quilt that's behind me. This quilt is called Helion 2. It is made out of a fabric line from Jason Yenter, who is a designer for In the Beginning Fabrics. He designed both the fabric and the pattern. And we're going to be using his pattern to make this beautiful quilt from only 2 different fabrics. We have these fabrics in the shop now. This is the border stripe that we're going to be using to make our kaleidoscope blocks. And then one other additional fabric. This is just to make the setting triangles between the blocks. So out of just these 2 fabrics, you get that entire quilt. This fabric also has other fabrics in it, the line has other fabrics in it that are complementary to all of the fabrics that are, or the colors that are in the line here. We have also the blue line with blue border stripe as well as other fabrics in that line. And in that one it will make this quilt. And then the pattern that I had used makes this one. Like I said, the one that's behind me. Okay, so first to start off, we need to talk a little bit about how to make a kaleidoscope block. And for this particular quilt, you do need to make some full blocks and some partial blocks to be able to complete it entirely. And what I did is I outlined some of the blocks here on the quilt itself. You will be making a block, as you can see, that has a kaleidoscope in the middle, and it's an octagon. There's actually 8 triangles that make the entire block itself, and then you add on these little setting triangles to make it into a square so that you can then put the quilt together square by square. So this is one of the blocks that's going to go in the middle. As you can see, it has this filigree stripe, and you note on the fabric on the border print there is a filigree stripe in this border print. We utilize that to also delineate this block with that filigree stripe going around the middle. There are 6 of them in this particular quilt. So I'm going to take this down because you also have to make alternate blocks to be able to complete this. And I wanted to show you what that one looked like, as there's 2 full blocks in the center that I call the alternate blocks. And they do not have the filigree stripe around the edge, they just have the black, so that it will actually make an alternate pattern across the quilt. So you will have a filigree stripe bordered block, you'll have a plain edge border on that block, and then you go back to another filigree stripe and then a plain. So it's the way they're cut, and I'll show you when we go to cutting how you end up making these different blocks. To complete the quilt, you do have to have 6 blocks that have the filigree stripe, full blocks. You need 2 full blocks of the alternate so that you've got this dark border around the edge, and there's just 2 of them. But then the remainder of the setting pieces are also with the dark border on the edge. This is one of the pieces that goes along the side of the quilt. So as you're coming down, you're going to have just a half a block here. And I tried to show where you have the pieces in the middle, and then those little setting triangles. I'll show you how we put those together. And then there are also, of course, and you have to have 6 of these, 2 on both sides, 2 on the bottom and top, and then you need 4 corner blocks. And I hope you can see this, but this one is set with the setting triangles, and then the triangles that you piece into the corner. Okay, I'm just going to pull these off real quick so that you can actually see the rest of the quilt. So let me get these out of your way. Now, when you make these take a little bit more to finagle, and you will end up cutting full 8 strips for these as well, but you only use 5 in the ones on the side, and you use 3 on the ones that are on the corners. And I'll show you how that works. All right. So to begin with, when you're going to do kaleidoscope types of quilts, you will have 8 strips of fabric. This particular yardage comes with 4 repeating stripes on the bolt. You get enough fabric to be able to make 8 full border strips, and you're going to cut all of them at the same time. To cut them, the pattern says to cut so that you will include the filigree stripe at the bottom and an additional 1/4 inch. So you're always going to cut at least a 1/4 inch past where your filigree stripe is, because that's what you need to have to piece it so that it keeps that stripe intact. Now the pattern says to go ahead and cut 9.5 inches across here. And I did that, and his reasoning behind that was because it might give you more alternate places to, to be able to cut. Like if you're going to cut a triangle, sorry, let me get this down to where it's supposed to be. If you're going to cut your triangle there, you're going to get everything that's going to have this repeat rows in the center. So that would be like this block here. You would have that kaleidoscope type of pattern going around using this one. If you flip that over, let's say that this is where I cut, I'm going to flip this to this side to be able to make the next one. He says to make it 9.5 so that you have more room to be able to move this up or down. I think that's a little klutzy, and I think it makes it more difficult to be able to cut them, because you really like to have your ruler be able to mark right on the line here. And also, you also would have your point, and let me show that on the white. The nice thing about this Creative Grids ruler is that it has a point that blocks off, so that if you put that right on your edge, you're going to have a perfect way to piece those without all that additional fabric in the way when you're doing the center of the block. So if you're going to cut it 9.5 but have to cut them 8.5, you always have to worry about juggling where to get that cut. And I just think it's not a easy way to do things. For my taste, it would be better to just start out with a strip that is 8.5 plus the 1/4. So you would put your 8.5 mark right on that line, and you would end up cutting it. I should get a long ruler. Sorry, Nate. Let me do this right. You can see that you need an extra 1/4 inch. So you're going to just put that right down that line, and you're going to cut your extra 1/4 inch for your piecing, and then mark up to the 8.5 from there, and then you'll have everything the way you need it to be, rather than having to always worry about cutting. Sometimes you get those points not quite right, and they're so much easier to piece if you use the way the Creative Grids has done this, because they have actually made that work for you, so that if you keep it right there, when you sew off, you're going to be right on that point, and they're going to mesh right where they're supposed to be. All right, so that's the fabric. You would take and roll those all out, make all 8 cuts of that, and then you've got to worry about matching them up so that you can get the same motif on each part of your kaleidoscope block. So I have just a little piece here that I kind of wanted to be able to show you. You're not going to have all the nice edges. They're all going to be different because you're going to be matching them up. So don't worry, they're all going to be different ones. But to do this, you're going to line these up by taking a motif somewhere in the design that you can, actually go right through to be able to be on the same spot. So let's say that I'm going to take the point of that little leaf right there, and I'm going to put my pin straight down through it, and then I'm just going to take each layer of fabric, put my pin right in that point of that leaf, pull it back. Same thing, put that pin right in where it's supposed to be, on that point of that leaf, each layer. That one's off just a little bit. And there. Okay, now you're going to pull your pin all the way through all those layers, and you're just going to kind of shake them out a little bit. Make sure that they're going to lay flat. And once you feel like you've got them all in a nice flat area, you're going to take an additional pin, and you're just going to pin right next to where you put your pin in to hold those layers in place until you're ready to cut. Now when I did this with the borders, I basically took probably 4 or 5 different spots around an area where I planned to cut. And then before I went, like let's say this is the rest of my yardage and I knew I was going to do a triangle this way, I would make sure that I checked something like maybe this dot, and I would take that and I would do the very same thing. I would take each one of these and make sure that I was right in the center of that dot. Is that showing okay, Nate?
Yep.
Oops, got 2. Okay. Now one of these was a little bit short, so we're going to try to wiggle that down a little bit. And then same thing, pull the pin tight right up against your fabric. Kind of try to make sure that everything feels like it's nice and straight underneath. And then you just take an additional pin and pin here as well, like so. So I've got a couple other spots, but I would keep doing, and I went probably like the width of my cutting mat. I would pin enough of the border stripes so that I knew all of those would match, and then I would cut them. And when I was done with that part, then I would do the same thing. I would match up all my motifs, probably, like I said, 5 or 6 different places, and I'd make the cuts on the next one and just keep going until I got through that entire border stripe. So for this one, we use a Creative Grids spider web ruler. This is a really nice ruler for making 45-degree angle cuts, and that's what you will need. You'll need 8 of these to make your kaleidoscope. So to do that, I'm going to take and put my ruler down, and I'm going to have to get that pin out of my way because I'm going to want to cut there. But what I did is I ended up there. Let's make sure I got to the very end of all my fabric, and okay, and I'm going to take, and the other important thing is, oh, that's right. Never mind, I almost did that. Let me get my whiteboard out of the way and get down to the mat. Alright, let's try this again. So, we are going to, there we go. The other thing you should always remember is a nice fresh blade makes a big difference on these, because you want to make sure it stays nice and tidy up against that ruler. And now we have to, not that I like doing cross cutting, but we need to clean these up. do a little, I think we got it pretty well. So let's see what they look like now that we've got them cut. And we can lay this out. All right, so kaleidoscope block, as you can see, it looks like a kaleidoscope because it's the same image that goes all the way around the block. To put this together, you're going to take 2 at a time, and you're going to line them up so that you've got this filigree border stripe matched up. And you can cheat a little bit. You can usually see on the edge of the fabric where those border stripes are. And then my pin's in the way. But you know, you can see where that is so that when you put this in, it's right down the border stripe. That little white line or that light colored line. So you know you've got those lined up. And then you just line up the rest of your block. You are going to sew this now from the wide end down to the narrow in 1/4 inch, and when you get down to the point, you're going to end up right at that point so that you will have no bulk with all of it. If it had that point of fabric, you'd have all that extra stuff at the middle, and that causes more of a bump in your quilt. So the Creative Grids company has made this easy for us. And as you start putting them together, they all mesh so that you know you're right in the right spot. So you're going to sew that one together. You're going to sew the next one together all the way around. And you do them on like a half a block at a time. So once you've got these 2 together, let's just pin this like it's actually sewed. You're going to make sure that you iron your seams all the same way. So if you did this, you'd have them going that way. This one would be going this way. And then you're going to sew these 2 together. Same thing. You're going to have this seam also going that same direction. And that looks like a mess, but I do have an example. This is only 3 of them, like for a corner block, but I've got everything going the same way. And I've got all my little points that are coming, you know, right to where they should be. You're going to sew right across where those all mesh or cross each other. That's going to be your point that you're going to match up with the rest of your other side. Does that make sense? Let me say that again. If you end up sewing these all the way they are, you're going to have a cross point where you're going to go right there when you match it up to the other side of your quilt, and it's going to be right on that point that you're going to be matching, and then you sew across. Okay, so this would be making a full block. This one would be all 8 pieces, like the ones that have the filigree stripe. That is going to be what this block will look like. But I wanted to show you what you do with the partial blocks. The side blocks and the corner blocks are ones that have to have pieces added to them, but it looks odd because he makes you do 5 of the actual triangle pieces together, and you're going to add on your corner or your setting triangles on 3 of them. And then when you get everything together, you know, if you've got your other block, you know, up against here, let's just say there's another block here, you're going to end up trimming them, you know, so that you get a straight line across. That's not making a lot of sense, but let me show you on the quilt. If we were going to say that this is this block right here, we are going to end up having to trim off half of this one. As you can see, this is the full block here. This is just a half a block here, This is also a full block and a full block, but that fifth one, again, is just a half. You end up trimming everything right along that whole line to make this side. And if we did this here on my, you would set it so that you had a 1/4 inch right where everything meets, right there in the center. That's 1/4. And you want to make sure that you've got it straight across. Now the way I a lot of times will do that to double check myself, I will use my Creative Grids spider ruler, and these are handy because they have a center line down the middle of them, and they also have the stitched line. So if you're going to double check yourself, you're going to put this down so that you've got your, get this going the wrong way. Yeah, oh, it is this way. If you do this so that you've got your block in the right place, there's a seam line here that you're going to put that ruler right down on your seam, and you're going to be able to see that this is going to be your middle and this is going to be the line that you're going to cut, because you need that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if I go back and check myself with my long ruler, I usually put this underneath. You can draw on it too, but I usually will put this underneath and then double check myself with this one, and I'll put that stitch line right on my seam, and I'm going to look to see, am I cutting the right spot? Now I might have to adjust my long ruler just a little, and once I know that I've got everything lined up with this, I know I'm in the right place, and I'll be able to cut right down that one. So it is a handy tool to use also for your cutting. Now you could say, well, let's save the fabric and just cut that the way it is to begin with. You could do that, but it's probably better to leave it the whole way until you got the whole thing pieced. And then you can go back and do the long cutting and check yourself with your Creative Grids. This is what you do for the side blocks. The other one is the corner block. Same kind of thing happens here, only you have 3 of the triangle pieces and 2 of the setting triangle. And when you put this into the corner, you're going to have to trim. We'll put this down here so we can show you. You're going to have to trim it so that you can get rid of this edge again. Can you see down there, Nate? Not so great?
Not too great.
Okay, sorry about that. But you're going to have to do the same kind of thing, because you're going to end up trimming this so that you're going to have half of a setting triangle, and you're going to want to make sure you got a 1/4 inch here. And so you're going to do the same thing. You're going to trim that right off. And to double check yourself, you can put this little seam line right on your block. And on this one, I'd have to adjust a little bit around to get it to where I would cut. And I think my plastic on my ruler is giving me a little problem, but let me see if I can line that up again. If you put it on the seam and you put this right there, you're going to line them up so that the cut line of where my ruler is should match the cut line on my ruler here. And I think I moved it a little bit much, but that's how I do it. I double check myself that this is actually going to give me the right size so that it will square it up. I forgot to say before, one of the other things that helps a lot with accuracy, for me at least, is using a product called Seam Align. And what you can do with this is when you're putting blocks together, as we were showing you before, if we wanted to put together this, and let's say we're going to hook it up to this one, you're going to be able to put in and you could pin it easily enough you know, to get it. But once you know where you're going to be going with this, you can back this up just a little bit, put a drop of the seam-align right there, hit it with an iron so that it stays, and then you can check yourself. Once it's that way, you can flip it over and did you do okay? If you don't like where it's at, you take it loose and start over. But the seam-align, because this stuff is all bias on these edges, it gets kind of wonky sometimes, because even this one I've ripped out or did enough with it. I would probably seam-align the whole thing and make sure that I have it in the right place so that it's not going to shift on me before I get it sewed. So this is a big help, especially doing the triangles, because they're all bias edges. All right, so in summary, this is a quilt that's made of 2 fabrics, border and the setting triangle. You set them all on, you make them so that they are squares, and then you're going to sew them block to block in a diagonal fashion. So you're going to have a corner block, then you're going to sew it to this filigree one, then to the alternative block, to another filigree, and then to finally an edge. And they go in diagonal, so you will be always piecing whole lines on the diagonal. Not even going to talk about the borders. The borders are mitered. There's pretty good instructions in the pattern on how to do the miters, so that won't be any big problem for you. Just a little extra note, this is a real handy ruler to have for other projects, and we've laid out a couple different things for you to take a look at. This is a pattern by Cut Loose that makes these wonky trees for Christmas, but they've cut pieces based on making a strip and then cutting, you know, based on this. And in the instructions, it tells you, you know, what size you need to make. This one's going to be that little piece in there. But it'll be different places that you end up cutting these pieces, and it'll make that particular style. It's also done in this coffee cup pattern, same kind of thing. They stripped these 3 fabrics together, and then they used the ruler to cut apart the piece that they needed, which would be about there. And it'll tell you, I need cut that, and then you can sew that to that piece. That piece has also been cut out of a strip. So it's a handy thing to use a lot of different patterns that will cut these odd shapes. This one on the bottom is a typical Kaleidoscope pattern. Again, it's 3 fabrics pieced, the blue, the yellow, and the pink, and they just kept cutting along until they would cut that way. They'd flip their ruler so that it would end up with the pink at the wide end and the blue at the narrow end, and they just kept cutting pieces. And once again, this is an 8-piece Kaleidoscope that goes all the way around. So I guess in the long run, this is not just a ruler for making the Kaleidoscope block. It will make a lot of other ones. There's a QR code on the actual ruler that you can scan, and it will give you instructions on how to use the ruler. It'll give you layout instructions, so there's a lot of information that goes along with these rulers as well. All right, well, I think that's all I have for you today, and I hope you enjoy making the quilt. I know I love it. I think it turned out beautiful. It's a fun one to do, and it certainly looks complicated, but hopefully this gave you some ways to make it a lot less daunting to do. And if you have questions for me, please don't hesitate to contact me here at the Red Pine Quilt Shop. I'd be happy to discuss it with you. Thank you.